this video, I want to explain how to obtain an approximate posterior predictive distribution using sampling. So firstly, why would you want to obtain the posterior predictive distribution in the first place? Well, the two main reasons are firstly to predict or to forecast new data, and the second and a really important reason is to check your model fit using what are known as posterior predictive checks. And this is a really valuable and important thing that you must do whenever you fit a model in the Bayesian paradigm. So there is an exact equation for the posterior predictive distribution. But importantly, in most applied circumstances, this equation requires intractable calculations to be done. And so we can't obtain the exact posterior predictive distribution. So instead, what we do is we obtain it using sampling. So the posterior predictive distribution is the probability distribution over some new data, call it x tilde, given that we've observed our sample x. And in practice, we approximate this distribution in two steps using sampling. So in the first step, what we do is we obtain a value of theta I by independently sampling from our posterior distribution. Then what we do is we use that value of theta I and we plug that in to our sampling distribution, and then we sample a value of x tilde. This should be conditional on that value of theta I. So the idea is that we repeat this sort of process for I equals 1 to many. So we just repeat these two steps many times. And then if we draw a histogram of the x tilde values, that is an approximation to our posterior predictive distribution. And note that each of these steps really represents the two sources of uncertainty that we have in predicting new data. Firstly, there's uncertainty over the value of theta, and so that's dictated by our posterior. And then secondly, there's the uncertainty in the data generating process itself. So even if we did know what theta was, there is still some randomness in that process, and that's what the second step in this sampling procedure means. To explain how this works, I'm going to go through an example now. So the example we're going to use is we're going to imagine that we've got a sample of 10 6-year-old children. And in that sample of 10 children, we count the number that can read. And so let's suppose that in this sample, we obtain 2 children who can read out of 10. To come up with a suitable likelihood, we need to come up with some assumptions here. And two of these assumptions aren't really assumptions, they're just facts. The first is that we have a fixed sample size. The second is that the observed outcome here, x, is a discrete random variable. And in the case where we're just measuring the number of children whose literacy exceeds some given threshold, here we're just going to have a discrete random variable. So these two first assumptions aren't really assumptions, they're facts. The next two are assumptions, however. A common assumption that we might make in starting out with this problem might be that the literacy of one child is independent of that of another child. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if we know the literacy of one child, that does not help us predict the literacy of another child, apart from the fact that they both are coming from the same population. So this would be violated if we took children from the same family or from the same class, for example, because then you would expect those children to be more similar than children in the overall population. And suppose that what we're interested in here is inferring the literacy rate of 6-year-old children in the population. The final assumption that we make is that the children come from the same population. In other words, their data is identically distributed. And this would be violated if, say, some of the children were coming from one population and some other of the children were coming from a different population. So if you combine all of these assumptions together, what we obtain is a binomial likelihood. So that's what I'm going to use in this example. And so we're assuming that x here is binomially distributed with a sample size of 10 and a parameter theta, where theta represents the proportion of the population of 6-year-old children who can read. If we then use a beta prior on theta, and here I'm just going to use a uniform prior, so that's a beta 1,1 distribution, And the benefit of using a beta prior is that it is conjugate to a binomial likelihood, which means that we can exactly calculate the posterior here, and we just get that theta given x is a beta distribution with the first argument just being 1 plus x, or x here is 2, and then the second argument being 1 plus n is 10, minus x, which is 2. So the reason we've got two 1s there is because in our prior we've got 1 for both of the arguments. So what does that mean? It means that we get a beta 3,9 distribution here as our posterior. So in this first example that I'm going to show, we are going to be first of all sampling from a beta 3,9 distribution to obtain a value of theta I. Then we use a binomial sampling distribution conditional on that theta I to sample a value of x tilde. And I'm going to assume in both the examples which I show here that the sample size in my new predicted dataset is 10. So here I've just made some simulations in Mathematica to illustrate how we can build up the posterior predictive distribution by sampling. On the left-hand plot here, I have the posterior distribution. So as I said before, that's a beta 3,9 distribution. In the middle plot here, I show a binomial probability distribution which is conditional on the value that we sample from our posterior. So here in our posterior, I show the value that we independently sample as this dotted orange line here, which turns out to be about 0.051. And you can then plot what a binomial distribution with a sample size of 10 and a probability of 0.051 looks like, and it looks something like this. Then what we're going to do is we're going to sample a value of x tilde from that binomial distribution. So if I just step this forward, it turns out we randomly sample a value of 1 here, which goes into building up our histogram of our posterior predictive distribution on the right. Then, if I run this again, we're going to sample a different value from our posterior. So the orange dotted line here is going to shift somewhat. So now we sample a value which is about 0.296. And that causes the binomial distribution in the middle here to shift over to the right somewhat. So now we're sampling a value of x tilde from a different binomial distribution. So now we sample that, and we obtain again another value of 1. Then we can repeat the process, sampling a different value of theta. Now we get 0.176. We get a different distribution in the middle here. Then we sample out a different value of x tilde. And I can continue running this process, and as you see, in each case we're sampling a new value of theta I, then we're sampling a new value of x tilde conditional on the sampling distribution assuming that theta I. And you can see that as we do so, we build up an approximate posterior predictive distribution here on the right. I now want to illustrate how, if we repeat this process a large number of times, we can build up a posterior predictive distribution that starts to converge to a given distribution. So if I run this process, so we can see that in each state we are sampling a value of theta I, which is changing our binomial distribution that we're sampling from. And then on the right here, we can show that our posterior predictive distribution is starting to take some shape. And then if I was to run this process for much, much longer, we can see that the posterior predictive distribution that we build up here actually converges to a given shape. And so, unsurprisingly, the distribution here, because our posterior distribution is centered on about 0.2, our posterior predictive distribution is centered on about 2 out of 10. So we would predict, or the most likely values would be sort of 1 or 2 individuals being able to read out of a sample of 10 if we were to collect a new sample of data. I now want to illustrate this process, but for a different posterior distribution. So now on the left, what I'm doing is I'm assuming that we collected a sample size of 1,000 children, and out of those 1,000 children we found that 200 of them could read. And if we use the same uniform prior that I used before, that means that we get a beta 201, 801 posterior distribution. And unsurprisingly, because I've got a bigger sample size, my posterior is that much more narrow here. So now if I run this process, we can see that the values of theta that I'm sampling tend to be pretty close to one another and close to 0.2. And because of that, our binomial sampling distribution in the middle here isn't changing much between iterations. And I should have said that even though we collected a sample of 1,000 children in our original sample, I can still predict the number of children out of 10 in a new sample that were to be able to read. And so that's what I'm showing here on the right. My posterior predictive distribution is assuming that in the new sample, the sample size is 10. And so we can see that after some time, the posterior predictive distribution takes some shape and it converges to a distribution which looks something like this. So now what I'm showing is I'm showing the two examples above and below here. So the first example is just where we obtained a sample size of 10 children and 2 of them could read, whereas the bottom one's where we have a sample size of 1,000. And so we can see that the posterior between these two examples is quite different, with obviously the second one being that much more narrow. Whereas on the right, we don't notice such big differences in the posterior predictive distribution. Sure, the second one is slightly more narrow and slightly more peaked at 2, but overall, there aren't that marked differences between the two posterior predictive distributions. So why is that? Well, it's because the posterior predictive distribution represents the uncertainty over two different causes. It represents the uncertainty over our value of theta, which we don't know, and that's what's represented by our posterior, and that's what we sort of represent when we're doing our first step, where we sample a value of theta from the posterior. But the second source of uncertainty comes from the sampling distribution itself. So that comes from a binomial distribution here. And it turns out that the binomial distribution that we sample from is relatively insensitive to the value of theta that we're sampling across these two examples. So basically what's happening here is that the posterior predictive distribution is really representing mostly the uncertainty in our sampling distribution, because that tends, in this example, to be the dominant source of uncertainty. So, in summary, the posterior predictive distribution is a distribution that tends to be too difficult to calculate analytically. So, in most applied circumstances, we obtain it using sampling. In the first step, we sample a value of theta from our posterior, and then, conditional on that value of theta that we obtain, we then sample a value of x tilde, the value of data in a new sample. And if we repeat that process a large number of times, we then obtain a posterior predictive distribution, or an approximate one. The posterior predictive distribution is representative of the uncertainty from two sources. One of them is the source of uncertainty over the value of the parameters, theta, and the second source of uncertainty comes from our sampling distribution itself, which represents uncertainty over the process which generates data.